let's take a look at the 1998 MLS Playoffs. And the 1998 MLS Playoffs was something special because we saw the Chicago Fire become only one of two expansion teams to ever win MLS Cup in their expansion year. And in some way, they kind of did it in an upset fashion because a lot of people thought that DC was going to win it again. You know, they won the first two MLS Cup and they were looking for the peat. And a lot of people thought that it was going to happen, especially DC made it to MLS Cup again. But the Chicago Fire, led by Bob Bradley, was able to create a gigantic upset against DC, and as I said, they only become one of two expansion teams to ever win MLS Cup in their expansion year. But let's take a look of how they actually got here, and we start off giving you guys a little bit background information about the 1998 MLS playoffs. Just like the first 2 years of the playoffs, the format is pretty much the same. You have the conference semifinal, the conference final, and then we got the MLS Cup. You will have 4 teams coming from the Western Conference that will be playing in the conference semifinal, and you have 4 teams in the Eastern Conference participating in the conference semifinal. We still are in a world of MLS where there is no two-leg affair or single elimination, as we've seen today. It is still best of 3 series, and as I mentioned before, I think it's going to be a couple more years before we actually will have two-leg affair happen in the playoffs. We're still in a world where shootouts still exist in MLS, where games, once they ends up in a tie, instead of potentially going to extra time, or depending on if a team able to score more away goals than the other team and they were able to win on away goals throughout the both leg, they will instead just goes to a shootout if the game is tied after 90 minutes, except in MLS Cup where that is when if the game remains tied after 90 minutes, we go to extra time, and we could go to penalty if the game remained tied after extra time too. So let's take a look at the conference semifinal. We start off with the first game of the conference semifinal between DC and Miami. Yes, Miami Fusion actually made it to the playoffs as an expansion team, and you know, this was also back then where making the playoffs was not a difficult feat as you will see nowadays, although it was a little bit tougher heading into the 1998 MLS season, because rather we see 8 out of the 10 team make it to the playoffs, and you literally had to be the worst team in your conference to not make it to the playoffs in the first 2 seasons. This year, since we had 2 new expansion teams and that there's now 12 teams in the league, that means there's going to be 4 teams that will miss the playoffs. But still, you still have over a 50% odd of actually making the playoffs, and Miami, despite the fact that they didn't really have a good season, still able to snuck it in as the 4th seed. But they had to play against DC, and many people didn't really give Miami a chance, and to be fair, they kind of fought hard against DC. You know, in the first game, they only lost by 1 goal, where they lost 2-1 to DC United. And in the second game, they fought to a 0-0 draw, but obviously we go into a shootout, and unfortunately, this is when DC was able to win the shootout, and they move on into the conference final once again. Now, in the other semi-final, it was between Columbus and New Jersey MetroStar. The first game was an incredible 8-goal thriller, which the Columbus crew was able to win. And then the second game, just like the DC versus Miami game, it went to a shootout after it was tied at 1 apiece, and it was Columbus able to win that shootout as they move on into the conference final. Now, in the Western Conference semifinal, in the first game, we got the LA Galaxy versus Dallas Burn. The Galaxy, of course, was Supporters Shield, and they were the favorites to make it to conference final, and potentially a lot of people thought that it was going to be a LA versus DC kind of MLS Cup, but later we'll find out that that was not meant to be. But in this game between the Galaxy and the Burns, the first game, yeah, the Burns got absolutely roasted, and no pun intended there. But yeah, they lost 6-1 in the first game. They made it a little bit interesting in the second game, but unfortunately they lost 3-2 to the Galaxy as the Galaxy move on into the conference final. And then we look at Chicago Fire, who, as I mentioned, eventually they become MLS Cup champion. They started their playoff journey to MLS Cup with a 2-1 win against Colorado in the first game, and in the second game they won 1-0 against the Colorado Rapids to move on to the conference final against the LA Galaxy. Now, moving on into the conference final, we had in the Eastern Conference, it was DC versus Columbus, and this was actually the only game out of all the playoff series where it actually went to the distance. DC was able to win 2-0 in the first game, but Columbus were able to win 4-2 at home in the second game, where we go to a decisive third game, which unfortunately, if you were thinking that there was some exciting things going to happen in the third game, you would unfortunately be disappointed to find out that DC was able to take care of business and win 3-0 against Columbus to reach their third straight MLS Cup and become the only team in MLS franchise to reach MLS Cup in the first 3 years. Then we look at the Western Conference Final, where, again, a lot of people thought that the Galaxy was going to make it to MLS Cup, but surprisingly, in the first game, it was Chicago pulling off a surprising 1-0 away win against the Galaxy. And then in game number 2, after a hard-fought 1-1 draw between both of these teams, they went to a shootout, which the Chicago Fire was able to win that shootout and win 2-1 to move on into MLS Cup 98, which happened on October 25th, 1998. This game took place at the Rose Bowl, and there was around 51,350 people attended this game. Not as much as last year MLS Cup, when I think it was 57,000 fans attended that game. But obviously the reason why this year there wasn't as much people attended this one is this one was taking place at the Rose Bowl. And, you know, this is also one of the reasons why I think besides the fact that the Chicago Fire pull off a big upset against DC in the MLS Cup, you could say that they kind of denied the Galaxy of potentially playing MLS Cup in front of their own stadium, because back then the Galaxy wasn't playing at the StubHub Center, or Dignity Health Park as it's called. That stadium didn't build for a couple of years, and they had a chance to play in front of their home fans at the Rose Bowl. And if that is the case, I think that could potentially be a record in terms of MLS Cup final. And you could maybe argue that we could have maybe got around 70 or around 80,000 people watch the game with the way if the Galaxy was able to play against DC United in the MLS Cup. I mean, in the previous year when DC hosted the MLS Cup at their home stadium, RFK was pretty much packed to the roof. So I'm assuming with the Rose Bowl not only bigger than RFK, and that I know it probably won't be full capacity, but it's going to be very close if the Galaxy would have made it to MLS Cup, and that we could have had a different history in terms of attendance-wise of what it's the most attended game in MLS Cup history. But in this game, as I said, the Chicago Fire was able to win 2-0 and create an upset against DC. Pato Bronzi scores the first goal in the 29th minute. Then Gutierrez scored right on the stroke of halftime to give Chicago a 2-0 lead. And that is the final score of the game, as the Fire, as I said before, they won MLS Cup this year and become one of only 2 expansion teams to win MLS Cup and create a bit of an upset against DC. And I believe throughout the first 4 season, and this is kind of a little bit of a spoiler alert in terms of what happened in the 1999 season, I think this was the only year where during this first 4-year spell that DC wasn't able to win MLS Cup. All the other year where they reached MLS Cup for the first 4 years, they were able to win MLS Cup during that year. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. I think next week I am going to either do the 1999 MLS season recap, or I'm actually just going to do a classic match where I'm going to kind of analyze what happened in that match. But stay tuned for that. That's going to be on Thursday. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.